This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And greetings once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. I must beg you, I implore you, if you're listening to this broadcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer, there's a lot of alliteration. By all means, follow us. Watching us on our YouTube channel, please click the subscribe button below, smash the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Rob Tornoe is famous because Rob Tornoe has a Wikipedia page. Rob, you have a friggin' Wikipedia page. I don't have a Wikipedia page. Gordon Burrell doesn't have a Wikipedia page. You got one. Congratulations.
I was going to ask, is that very impressive in, the 2020s or whatever decade we're calling this?
Well, it's just because Google, whenever you type a name in, decided to throw Wikipedia into the knowledge pane on the right. So it gives you a little, I don't know, who knows?
Yeah.
But according to Wikipedia, you're a cartoonist and writer, one of the last remaining sports cartoonists on the staff at a newspaper. Sports cartoons appear in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Political cartoons appear WHYY, which I know because I'm a Philadelphian. I was born and bred there. That's the public television station there. Press of Atlantic City, the News Journal, and others. Political spoofs ranging from Al Gore to Peanuts. In addition to cartooning, Tornoe writes for something weird called Editor and Publisher. It's right there in Wikipedia with a link to my site. So
it must be true. It must be true.
Must be true because it's Wikipedia and also the Poynter Institute, our partner on the Media Job Board. Rob, you've been writing for this publication for a long time, 10 years now, yeah. I think you've been writing for you. And my wife and I've only had it for 3 years. But we are honored to have your work not only with a monthly column, we also have your work with a monthly cartoon and spoiler alert, although this is going to be broadcast in December, you've designed our December cover as well. So thank you for all your hard work for us.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's crazy that it's been 10 years. I remember I started off writing about syndication and cartoonists and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously how I came about. But yeah, no, it's great.
Well, we're going to do a little best of. I'm going to go through your columns from 2022 and just kind of quiz you on why you wrote on some specific topics. And with your kind permission, sir, we'll do that on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
Okay, Rob, I'm going to take you back to March of 2022. New York Times journalist David Leonhardt discusses reporting on the pandemic. And there's some really great thoughts in here that I'd like to quiz you on. I mean, first of all, why did you pick David to talk to about reporting on the pandemic?
Well, because David had an interesting perspective. He writes the daily newsletter every morning for the New York Times, and he was covering it from a perspective of looking at the numbers, looking at the science, but not necessarily following what every single person, you have to wear a mask, he was really looking at the data to see where it might be appropriate, what was changing as COVID was changing and how we sort of got along with it. So he had a really interesting perspective. And obviously he's a very talented award-winning reporter and, he's just a very knowledgeable source.
I mean, the topic was very apropos and perfect for the timing, especially in March. And, vaccines are obviously become a polarizing subject, he says. I get the sense that when we report on the success of vaccines, we're largely reaching people who are vaccinated, and those that remain unvaccinated are just ignoring it. But right. I love some of the kernels in there that have, how should I say it, a little broader beyond COVID. For example, if I make, and I love this quote you pulled out of him, or maybe he offered it up willingly. Our job is to reflect reality, even if it's not changing any minds. Did you pull that quote for a reason? I mean, do you feel sometimes that journalists just feel this need to constantly, I have to make a statement rather than realize your job is just to do great reporting? I'm curious why you pulled that quote in.
Right. Well, it kind of came up in COVID, and also has come up in politics and elections, where with COVID specifically, there were a lot of reporters who felt like you wanted to pattern good behavior, right? So I don't want to say people were minimizing wrong news, but, sort of elevating pro-vaccine news and maybe, downplaying some of the aspects of whether or not masks are really that effective for kids. Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a part of that where reporters felt a challenge in that moment to do good in their community, in their society. And, sometimes that might have stepped on the actual facts or things that they should have just been reporting on. They were more concerned in a broad sense with helping the community versus what their own reporting can do to impact that.
And Leinart goes on saying, you're a journalist, you're not a doctor.
Right.
Your job is to ask the questions that ordinary people ask and give answers that are useful to them about their lives. Talk to experts, look at the data. In other words, he's kind of like steering us back to the reality of journalism. I think sometimes, especially, and this is just my 2 cents, but it's my show. I can do whatever the hell I want.
Right.
I just, the cable news echo chamber can make us sometimes forget what journalism is. Do you agree? I mean, I think that's what he's doing in this article. He's saying, stop watching those talking heads and get back to the core mission of journalism.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I write about a lot with social media, how reporters, it's sort of like this weird echo chamber where a bunch of reporters are on Twitter, but hardly anybody else is.
Well, we're going to get to that. You're flipping my letter a little too quick. but
the same thing.
Go ahead.
Same thing applies here, right? Same thing applies here. You get into this mindset of, what you should be doing versus what your job is, right? And your job is not to change the hearts and minds of, people out there and convince them that what they're hearing on Fox News or whatever is wrong. Your job is to give them the facts, right? And that was one of the problems with COVID is people had a hard time making a value judgment for themselves and their family because the facts were all over the place and there's all these numbers and it's changing every day. And so you don't know what to do for your family. And I felt like journalists may have tried to step into that zone when really people just want information, right? People just want the data.
Thank God. Because I think that's one of the things that EMP is trying to start to really get back to is good old fashioned reporting. In a world where everybody just wants to watch their favorite, cable channel over and over again. I mean, how much reporting really sometimes is going on in some of those shows is mind-boggling because it's
almost zero, right? There are people sitting in a studio talking about things that other people have reported on.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move you to April. And I love this one because you did it's called Commentary Through Comedy, April 2022. That was your headline. David Fitzsimmons, the local editorial cartoonist, who I assume you're friends with or you communicate with.
Well, cartoonists have sort of a small community at this point. So
that's what you say here. According to a study done by Herb Block Foundation, which I've never heard of, but I'm assuming they're credible. There were about 2,000 full-time editorial cartoonists employed by newspapers in the U.S. at the start of the 20th century. As recently as the year 2000, there were upwards of 250. Today, by your count, there are less than 20 editorial You are a very small fraternity, are you not?
Yeah. I mean, it's sadly, as newspapers have changed and digital environment has taken over, most editors are writers, most writers become leadership at newspapers, and they just don't know how to deal with cartoons, right? They're this weird sort of thing. So as a result, political cartoons are more popular than they've ever been. If you just go on social media or Facebook or wherever, you see them everywhere. But as far as staff cartoonists, it's a combination of editors being writers and, the consolidation of news, right? All these mega chains owning these papers. It's no coincidence that most of the staff cartoonists are working at independent papers or family-owned papers. And
you are still employed in Philadelphia at the Inquirer, but thank God, because you do amazing work. But I love, I mean, when David here spoke of his legendary, when Frank Sinatra died in '88, he drew him in hell. And with the caption, it's the only place he could get a hooker and a martini. Right. And he said he got a lot of flack for that. But what's wrong with how should I say, having a humorous stretching of the envelope a little with a cartoon? I don't think there's any. He said he got some hate mail, but what's wrong with that, right? I mean,
obviously, I think it's a benefit, right? All those readers. I remember Howard Stern years and years ago would talk about he loved the fact that readers would complain or the listeners would complain about him because it meant they were listening, right? They were engaged. Even the people that hated his guts would listen every day, almost more so than his fans. So when you have a cartoonist who like pokes and prods at the community, that's great. You're engaging people, you're talking, you can have a dialogue. That's the whole point of having a cartoonist in a sense.
Have you ever, I'm sure you have many stories on that. What was a very controversial one you put out into the Philadelphia Inquirer that got you a lot of hate mail?
I'll do this really quick. So I drew a cartoon after Joe Paterno died, obviously legendary coach at Penn State, where I had him in heaven with Bear Bryant, who's another legendary coach. And this cartoon went super viral. I mean, I sold prints. They had it on the AP. It was a mind-boggling successful cartoon. But after that, the Free Report came out that sort of showed his complicity in a Sandusky affair with children, right? He was, yeah. Everyone remembers that. So I drew a cartoon after that showed Bear Bryant kicking him out of heaven and him falling to hell. And
I'm sorry.
and
it made me laugh, but also cringe at the same time.
Right. So that got a lot of hate mail because of all these people who had loved me. Now I'm this, revered, this reviled figure for trashing Joe Pa. So yeah, that's just one example. Obviously I have many more, but yeah, that's just one.
Well, you poke a bear, sometimes it's going to wake up, right? I mean,
right.
What can I say? All right, let's go to May. Pulitzer, this was actually, I think, you making a definite statement. And by the way, the May article had the most engagement of all. You get a lot of engagement with ENP. That's why we pay that lofty fee you charge us every month that puts us almost, into bankruptcy. But your May editorial got massive shares and massive engagement and picked up by a lot of people because you took a little bit of a look at the Pulitzer Prizes and you said Pulitzer change leaves illustrators feeling slighted. New category muddies distinctions between illustrated reporting and editorial cartooning. Could you expound on that and why you wrote on that about the Pulitzers?
Right. So for years, the Pulitzer have had a editorial cartooning award. It's one of the obviously most prestigious journalist awards. So it really helped elevate the role of an editorial cartoonist. A lot of newspapers around the country have a Pulitzer specifically because of their political cartoons, Asbury Park Press, number of them. So recently, I imagine due to the decline of staff cartooning, Pulitzer changed the category to include visual journalists, people who write sort of graphic novel type stories, which are brilliant and wonderful. And it's amazing and thankful that they're elevating that form. I think it's a perfectly legitimate form of journalism. I love it. But the two are different. Opinion cartoons are opinion and, visual journalists are reporters. They're journalists. They're just doing it in a different medium. So that was sort of my critique, and a lot of cartoonist critique is it'd be like taking a reporter and an opinion columnist and giving them an award together, right? It doesn't jive.
Did you get any feedback from the Pulitzer Committee? Did anything happen to your knowledge?
No.
Did you get anywhere?
To me, it's just a misunderstanding of the art form. They're looking at it and saying, okay, they're both doing visual things, so it's a visual award, but they're not. I don't think that they really care much about my opinion, frankly. But and it doesn't seem like they've signaled any decision to change or move away from that. And it's disappointing because I think both deserve the respect and prestige that comes with the Pulitzer category.
All right, I'm going to move you to August now. Journalists continue to lean on Twitter. So you teased this one. And I wanted to get into this because it's fascinating. You did some reporting here. Sometimes you do. We let you go nuts. We don't give you a lot of. We love you, and you report to my wife, who handles editorial. I'm just an ad guy. I can't even put two words together. And my wife and you work together, and I read your stuff, and I love it. But here, I think you're trying to make a very bold statement. Journalists continue to lean on Twitter as fewer Americans use it as a news source. Duh! But how come no one else reported on that? And I'm going to give you the numbers you put out. How small? According to a recent Pew Research study survey, just 13% of adults in the U.S. regularly get their news from Twitter, trailing both Facebook and YouTube. In fact, 3/4 of the adults online don't even use Twitter. But 70% of U.S. journalists told Pew that Twitter is their social medias. We do that at E&P. We use Twitter and LinkedIn because we're a B2B publication. So obviously LinkedIn is our most active. We're very narrow, very B2B. But we use Twitter. We don't do Facebook. I mean, we rarely post to Facebook unless it's warm and fuzzy. So you're pointing something out that no one else did.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm the first to point it out, but for editor and publisher, for instance, it makes sense because your market is journalists or people in the journalism industry. So you should be on Twitter because that's where all the journalists are. But for most people, like if I'm writing for the Inquirer, most of my audience is on Facebook or just on Google search or wherever else. If you look at analytics, the numbers that Twitter is driving to any particular website is really low, much lower than Facebook or LinkedIn. And LinkedIn isn't a big driver of traffic. So, it's just this weird effect where reporters tend to want to write for other reporters and they see what other people are writing on Twitter. And they post scoops on Twitter, which is baffling to me, right? Why would you give that to Twitter when they're not doing anything for you traffic wise? So yeah, to me, it's like a big problem when, a lot of these reporters are being informed by what's happening on Twitter versus what's happening in the real world where most people live.
Your pull quote in that article, and we determined the pull quote, was actually some really darn good advice, if I may be so bold. If we're going to use comments on Twitter in our stories, at the bare minimum, we should place them in context, identify the writer, and mention why they are reluctant to they're relevant to the story at hand. Excuse me.
Right.
You might also want to think twice about embedding tweets with quotes that end up in your story unless the visual of the comment itself is central to your piece. You're really giving some great advice to the community with this that many just, I think, I don't want to be judgmental, but it seems that they get a little lazy, right? They're looking at their Twitter feed, saying, wow, there's some content, I'll just throw it in.
During the 2016 election, there was a big problem with Russian misinformation and stuff. And I did a story for the Inquirer on this. And it was actually one of our most read stories that year. And it was showcasing two individuals who had Twitter accounts that became very big Republican follows. They were MAGA, QAnon, like all that kind of stuff. They were Russian operatives. And what happened was they built a following by doing Taylor Swift quotes, right? And people would post the jokes in stories and they would get follows. And then they would switch. And it made them look legitimate because they had all these followers. And it was just because journalists were posting their tweets in stories in these roundups about, what did Kanye West say or whatever. And,
exactly.
During the election, they just switched it. So, yeah, it's just, again, like, why are we giving all this power to Twitter, right? Sometimes it's good to embed something. But if you're just embedding a quote, just quote someone and link to the tweet, just like you would anything else, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was sage advice. And I think that's why I think we value you a lot on E&P, because I think you're coming from experience, but you don't lecture. You just kind of make sure that it gets out there with some really good reporting. So thank you. That was a great article too. Also, your second most.
Thank you.
Well, let's move on now, because as we get into the fall, September and October, your September column and your October cover story, which was possibly one of the most controversial we've ever done at E&P, at least in our tutelage, almost go hand in hand. In September, your headline was, when the story is political, make sure it isn't politicized. And the reason I love this, and I read it again, is Robin and I just finished Margaret Sullivan's latest book, Newsroom Confidential. Have you found it yet? Or
yeah,
not?
I haven't had a chance to read it yet. No, but yeah, no. I know Margaret, like, she's fantastic.
We actually listened to it as we're driving a U-Haul truck from Tampa to Nashville, because we decided to move some plants and stuff last weekend. Right. So we're in this thing for 12 hours and we're listening to Margaret Sullivan's voice, and it resonated with me because Margaret Sullivan left the Buffalo News. For those of you who don't know Margaret Sullivan, she was the Buffalo News forever. That was really where she really, made her chops as one of the first, I think, female editors there ever, and one of the few female editors at the time. But then she was picked up and reported directly to Arthur Sulzberger at the New York Times as the public editor, one of the few public editors in the country. Does the Philadelphia Inquirer have a public editor?
No, we used to, but like most newspapers, that role has sort of, I think they view social media as being that position, right? We can hear from readers directly that way.
Well, Sulzberger believes there should be an editor that's embedded in the newsroom, but ain't the friend of the news people. In other words, this is a person whose job is to represent the readership. Do you agree? That's what the position would be, right? I mean,
I happen to think that newspapers should have those positions.
Right. I mean, call the paper out by watching social media, opening up a blog, getting the emails, reading every single reader comment and representing the reader. So the newsroom might necessarily love you because you're calling them out every now and then. But then you led this article when the story's political with the New York Times pitch bot, a satirical Twitter account run anonymously by a 52-year-old math professor who satirizes sometimes lazy conventions of the. Tell me more how you found this because I wasn't familiar with this. And you go into how the New York Times decided to, like, how should I put this? Politicize when Donald Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago they used terms that were more political, like invaded, right? I mean, you really spouted off on this one.
Well, the pitch bot is pretty popular on social media because, again, the New York Times is the largest paper in the country. So they take the most flack when they do things that are lazy. Obviously, they do tremendous reporting and are fantastic.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Essential source of journalism in this country. But, like anybody else, you go after the big dog. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to writing about politics, I think in that piece I spoke a lot about, or I wrote a little bit about, the dismissal of some of the Hunter Biden stuff, right? Because, again, to dovetail what we were talking about before, reporters learned from 2016 when we elevated the hacked emails of Hillary Clinton, and maybe in hindsight, that wasn't necessarily the best move to do, right? Because it turned out to be sort of a Russian operation. So when it came to Hunter Biden and a lot of this stuff, we kind of held back, maybe more so than we should have. So it's about calibration. And when it comes to politics, it's just so easy to use these hyperbolic terms instead of just reporting what's happening, right? Just report what's happening.
Well, it's almost like you're getting into the mud in your reporting and you start to sensationalize it based on the words being thrown out in the cable sphere, right? I mean, Donald Trump said my home was invaded or whatever, and then suddenly they start using that word as if it's a legitimate
raid. I think it was raid, right? Was it raid? I can't.
Was it a raid? It was a legitimate warrant, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, they knocked on the door. They didn't break it down. It's like
right. I mean, so we co-opt that terminology because he said it, and because raid is a very short, nice newspaper term, and we sort of lose the meaning of like the truth in that, right? Because you're like, to your point, that's not what happened.
And let's couch this discussion because we're about to go into your cover story with an agreement between both of us that all media is biased, right? Because a human being is writing it. We're not trying to say everybody has to be perfect. We're not robots. We have cultural things embedded in our brain from our youth through our life experiences. And we can all look back on how all media has been biased. We can go back to, Hearst and creating the Mexican-American War. I mean, I could go on the savages of, just so we can get a railroad built. I mean, we could go on and on. But the fact is we have to get better now more than ever. Do you agree? Because now is the time when people are losing faith in news in general, especially it's being attacked by fringe. And we better be pretty damn good at our reporting. Is that what this was? I mean, in my opinion, you were picking one example to make sure that we all realize that it's so easy to go down the wrong path. You agree?
Yeah. I mean, again, to our point earlier, I feel like we've been trying to convince people that journalism is important. It's valuable. It's, necessary. I always tell this to my son, show me, don't tell me, right? Same thing applies to reporting. You're going to show people that they can trust your news by writing trustworthy news, by giving them stuff that's relevant to them and letting them be informed. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that, right? There's a lot of ins and outs, right? You have like bad actors, you have cynical people, you have opinion, right? There's a lot of moving parts, but really it just comes down to informing people and being relevant in their lives.
Which brings us to October. And we're going to make this our last look, although you'll continue to write for us, I hope. And October cover story was one that my wife and you mulled over and spent a lot of time working on. Robin Blinder, my wife, has always been my business partner, is the VP of editorial. We don't call her editor in chief because she has many editors working with her, helping her. We have Gretchen Peck. We have a great team of people. But this was a big deal because your headline and our cover was Cable's Culture Wars on Americans, How Right-Wing Conspiracy Theories Impact Local News Reporting. You actually did the cover in a cartoon. It was memorable. It was a dump truck dumping with, some right-wing logos, not just Fox, but a lot of them, dumping garbage in front of a reporter. People instantly, without even reading the article, thought we were picking on the bias in news. We weren't. Do you agree? This had nothing to do with news bias. We agree news is biased. We're always trying to call that out. What this article was about is how blatant lies have made it difficult for local reporters. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Let me just say, when Fox called us up and asked us to kill the story, and kill you, by the way, they don't like you. And Fox News is, but their whole team was on the phone with us trying to, kibosh the story, because we gave them a chance to read it and comment, right? I mean, that was what we did. They didn't really see that. They just thought we were picking on them. So now take it away, sir. Tell me about how this story happened and what it was all about to you.
Yeah, so the story is really about local journalists. We have a Fox News, which obviously has a conservative bent. Some of their people, in my opinion, take things too far and are cynical in their actions, right? It's one thing to have an opinion about something and express it. It's another thing to be a more active participant in politics. Sean Hannity, for instance, was an advisor to President Trump while still being an opinion maker on Fox. So it was mostly about local reporters dealing with the downstream effects of this culture wars. School board, people reporting on school boards, when there's ridiculous stuff in the ether about, transgender kids and,
Yes.
it's just nonsense, right? But these reporters then have to deal with both parents who are watching Fox News and hearing this stuff, or even candidates, right, who are espousing this stuff. We have to go to the superintendent and say, hey, you guys don't have cat litters for kids, right? It's just nonsense. So it was more about the downstream effects of this news ecosystem and how it impacts reporters who are just in their communities trying to report the facts and do their job. And they're not fact checkers. They're not, policy wonks. This is not their job. But now it's becoming their job because of the way our media ecosystem specifically has become very nationalized.
But this is, and let me say this, as the publisher of ENP and as one of our senior reporters and columnists, this is a phenomena more to the right than the left. In other words, MSNBC doesn't spew out things that makes it difficult for a reporter to ferret out the truth. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, like they have their opinions, and in some cases they have strong opinions, and in some cases, in my opinion, they have bad opinions, right? And nobody's immune from this stuff. But what they don't have is a repeated stream of misinformation. For instance,
a lie.
That the election
Say
stolen.
It.
Right?
It's a lie. There are not cat litter boxes in every school in the United States. There is not. Right. I mean, we're not sitting around here doing. Not every school is teaching people critical race theory. That was, I mean, I could go on and on, but because Hannity and the evening news hosts who hear it from one source, like a Trump or one of his, I mean, just will say the words over and over and over and over again to get the base mad.
Right. And it's really really driven by Fox and other right-wing networks, but Fox specifically, not because they're any, I mean, you could say that they're worse in that sense, but it's just because they're more popular. Fox News is the dominant cable news outlet, so more people watch it, and they have more of an ability to inform. It's just like the New York Times, right? When the New York Times does something wrong, millions of people see it versus, say, the Poughkeepsie Journal or something. So, that's one of my flaws with Fox News. Is just they are the big dog. They are the ones who should be the most responsible. You can be conservative, but just be responsible with your journalism. And just as the story showed, like over the course of the last 3-4 years, they just haven't been. And
you even talk about Chris Stirewalt, who was on this very program. We talked with him, about his book, Broken News, Why the Media Rage Machine Divides. He was fired from Fox for telling the truth.
Right.
I mean, if you really want to, he called Arizona and he called it right. But then it's a good example of showing the economics, right? Fox News does what it does because it gets ratings. That's their business. But when it comes to the elections, the decision desk, it's valuable for being honest and accurate, right? If they turned that into a right-wing Hannity machine, nobody would watch Fox News on election nights because you wouldn't be getting it. So even though they fired Chris or whatever the termination, information they use,
he left, he separated because he reported on Arizona, right? Even though it wasn't his decision to make, they still didn't back off of that call, right? Because being right is valuable when it comes to reporting on elections. They just let all their other voices kind of like spew the nonsense.
I love the article as well, because you take it at all different levels. You talk about Eric Wemple at the Washington Post, but that follows Anna Lynn Winfrey at the Pueblo Chieftain.
Right.
You're not just talking at a high level here. You're at the Arizona Mirror. You're looking down line here. And what I liked about this article, and I could see that you put a lot of time and effort into this. You really found some really good sources and allowed it to be good reporting. But then you at the end, you gave some advice. And I'm going to quote you now. As misinformation and polarization began to become a larger part of Arizona politics, Small said he adjusted by taking the truth sandwich approach, a framework developed by author-linguist George Lakoff and promoted by New York University professor and author Jay Rosen to help focus reporting on blatant lies or wild misstatements without inadvertently spreading them further. It basically consists of 3 steps. And here's what you say. Start with the truth, indicate the lie without amplifying the specific language if possible, and return to the truth. Right. And then you say, always repeat truths more than lies.
Right.
That was the last words in your article. That's pretty damn poetic, yet are we going to get there? So this is how I want to end this interview. What's the future? Where do you see us going? What are you going to be writing about next year? What's in store now that we have to continue? And when you do read Sullivan's book, one of the things she does is she calls out both sides, Rob. She says when you give air to the lie on both sides, because it's great, as you said, ratings builder or money making, then we're just as at fault. So where are we heading?
I mean, I think that's going to be one of the challenges we see over the next 2 years, is how news outlets grapple with Trump being a presidential candidate again, because clearly, the years that he were in office, while chaotic, were very good for news organizations. Traffic, was up at most publications, including Philadelphia Inquirer, where I work. Traffic is now down as people seem to have gotten a lot of apathy towards politics. So there's going to be a tremendous incentive for reporters to just go back to doing things the way they were, whereas amplifying Trump and the nonsense that he says. Although I am heartened by how the journalism industry at large treated his announcement. The NPR had a great truth sandwich example in their tweet announcing it. I think it was something like Donald Trump, who lied about the election results. It led to an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and a desperate attempt to hold on to power, has announced that he's running for president again, right? That's what we need to be doing. Nothing in that tweet was inflammatory or wrong. It was all fact. It's just how you present it, And I think that that's going to be one of the challenges as we start to get this, nutso politics starting again, is if we can hold the line and just stick with informing people and not having to gin stuff up.
But there's still going to be 25% of the population that looks at that headline and says, how dare you, you biased left-wing elite media idiot. You see what I'm saying? That'll always be there, won't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's always been there. It's just we're able to hear it more, and Twitter and social media is able to amplify things more. But as I said at the beginning, real life is not Twitter. Look at Fox News. Fox News for the past 2 years has been amplifying this message of crime and violence and Democrats are bad and blah, 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 blah. What happened to this election? It's not as if the majority of Americans listened to Fox News and that's how they voted, right? Republicans had a terrible midterms by most accounts. So we don't have to just amplify things we see just because we happen to be on Twitter. It's, I feel like we can do our jobs the way we should be doing it. And if people are upset about it, that's their valuable. That's their opinion. Print a letter to the editor, right?
Exactly.
Encourage them to hone their criticism in a more productive way. I'm always surprised when people criticize me in my emails and readers, and I'll just respond back and say, thanks for the note. This is what I was thinking, blah, 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 blah. And suddenly it just demystifies the whole process. And, I have a lot of conservative people who sometimes read my work because I'm just a good guy, right? But again, it's just reaching people at the level that they need to be reached. And, I think that's better done through your actions than trying to convince them that they're wrong.
Repeat more truths than lies.
Pretty simple.
Rob Tornoe, cartoonist and writer. And by the way, one of the last remaining sports cartoonists on the staff at a newspaper. It has to be true because it's in Wikipedia. Also,
Right, of course.
And it is true because Wikipedia says that you're a columnist and you write for editor and publisher. We appreciate your work. I appreciate your time. Look forward to reading you in 2023. Stay well, stay healthy, and enjoy your holiday, sir.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.